B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Moed Katan Daf Dalad. We're going to start 19 lines from the top of the Omid. Says the Gemara, Aval loy mimei hageshomim umimei hakiloin. And this takes us back to the Mishnah on Daf Beis Omid Aleph. We saw in the Mishnah that mashkin beis hashalochin, an irrigated field that is relying and is dependent on water that man are adding to it besides for the rainwater it's getting, one's allowed to water such a field b'moed on chol hamoed. And then we discussed the different types of springs and streams that flow from those springs that one's allowed to use to water the fields. But the Mishnah added, avaloi mashkin, one's not allowed to water even such a field, loy mimei hageshomim, not from a reservoir of rainwater, v'loy mimei hakiloin, nor from the water that one draws from a well. And we saw that the reason for that is because of the excessive tircha, the burden, the effort that goes into doing that, and in chol hamoed that is not allowed. Says the Gemara, I can understand why drawing water from a well, should be hard work and excessive effort and should be osar and chol hamoed. But if I have a reservoir of rainwater, my tircha, what's the extra effort there? Why should I not be able to use that water to water the fields? Omer Rabbi Lo, Omer Rabbi Yechanan. So it was said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Gezerah mei geshomim otu mei kiloin. It's just a gezerah, which means that because the Chachamim didn't want you to draw water, typically rainwater, from a well, they said you should not use any rainwater at all, even a regular reservoir of rainwater that doesn't have that extra effort as drawing water from a well would have. That was Rabbi Yechanan's explanation. Rav Ashi Omar, mei geshomim gufayu lidei mei kiloin osu. Well, the rainwater also is in a reservoir. After you've removed a certain amount of water from that reservoir, from that collection of rainwater to water the field, the water level is going to go down, and then for all intents and purposes, it's got exactly the same status as a well, that you have to draw water up from low down in this reservoir and draw the water out, and that's going to again have the same effort as the mei kiloin, as drawing water from a well, and therefore they said it was asa. And they're arguing regarding what Reb Zera said. To Omer Reb Zera, Omer Rabbi bar Yirmiyah, Omer Shmuel. It was said in the name of Shmuel, if you have a river that is getting its water, that is flowing from the agamim, from ponds, and these ponds certainly could get emptied out theoretically. If enough water is drawn from them, the water levels could lower and they could get emptied out. Nonetheless, you're allowed to water from them from these rivers that are coming from these ponds. You're allowed to water from them a field on chol hamoed. So the Gemara is saying that Mar Rav Ashi Islay to Reb Zera, he held exactly like Reb Zera, and he said that the same way as Reb Zera said that you're allowed to water from the rivers that come from the ponds, and we're not concerned that the water levels will go down, so too Rav Ashi says that we always have to determine how much water there is here. And in Shmuel said that these rivers that come from the ponds, there is so much water there. Indeed, we do not need to be concerned. However, when it comes to the mei geshomim that we mentioned in our Mishnah, there Rav Ashi says that there's less water there, and there's a greater chance of the water levels lowering, and then you'd come to having to exert all that extra effort as you would a kiloin. And that's what Rav Ashi said before, that the reason you're not allowed to use the mei geshomim is because mei geshomim gufayu, this reservoir of rainwater, is lidei mei kiloin osu, can become similar to a well. So Rav Ashi, who holds of what Reb Zera said, holds of what Shmuel said, is because Rav Ashi assumes that it all depends on how much risk is there of this reservoir, this collection of water, from losing enough water that it should be an issue on chol hamoed. However, Rabbi Yechanan Umar, referring to Rabbi Yechanan, less later Reb Zera, he wouldn't agree with what Reb Zera said in the name of Shmuel, because Rabbi Yechanan said that it's a gezerah. Any collection of rainwater you're not allowed to use to water the fields on chol hamoed. It doesn't matter how much water is there. And in the same way as Rabbi Yechanan understood that is why mei geshomim in our Mishnah is not allowed to be used to water a field, he would say exactly the same regarding those rivers, the Nahoris Hamoishchim Maim Minu Hagomim. And in contrast to Shmuel, where Shmuel said that you're allowed to water from those reservoirs, from those rivers that are flowing from the ponds, Rabbi Yochanan will say no, there's a gzeira that any rainwater is not allowed to be used to water a field on Chol HaMoed. Says the Gemara, Gufa Amar Abzeira Amar Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah Amar Shmuel. We're now going to discuss this statement, this halacha that we just said in the name of Shmuel, that Shmuel holds that these rivers that are flowing from these ponds, one's allowed to water from them on Chol HaMoed. Rabbi Yirmiyah is now asking a question against Rabbi Zera, against this halacha. Did we not learn in our Mishnah that you're not allowed to use the waters, not only the wells, but also any reservoir of Mega Shamim, of rainwater, you're not allowed to use them to water a field on Yom Tov? Why should these be different? So Rabbi Zera answered to Rabbi Yirmiyah, Yirmiyah my son. This was a fond way of referring to him. It wasn't actually his son. He says, Hani agomim de bebavel kamaya de le paskudami. He explained himself. He says the reason that there's a difference, for those who hold there's a difference, according to Shmuel, who clearly holds there's a difference between the Mega Shamim mentioned in our Mishnah and these Nahoris Hamoishchim Mayim Min Agomim, is a very simple difference. That the Mishnah is talking about reservoirs that are smaller and are easier to get emptied out. However, in Bovel, these ponds from which the streams, the rivers were flowing from, in Bovel had so much water that the chances, the risk of them emptying out and lowering are so little and so far-fetched that we can assume that this is a reservoir, a collection of water which is not going to go down, and therefore one's allowed to water from them on Chol HaMoed. Continues the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon. Hapsikois v'abreichois, the ditches or the pools, shenismalu mayim me'erev Yom Tov, even if they got filled up with water before Yom Tov, also lehashkis mehen b'chol shel moed, you're not allowed to water a field with them on Chol HaMoed. However, if there was a stream of water that was flowing between these ponds, then mutter, you're allowed to actually use these ponds which are full of rainwater to water the fields. And we say that even if in the event that the water level does go down, he's not going to have to work so hard and draw the water from the bottom of the reservoir, or he's going to have to bring water from far away, both of which include excessive effort. No, he'll just resort and rely on the stream that's flowing in the field, and therefore there's no risk of the halachas of Chol HaMoed being breached, and therefore he's allowed to use these ditches and pools to water his field. Omer Rav Papa says, that's only on condition that most of the field could actually be watered by the streams that are going through this field. However, if most of the field could not be watered by these streams, then we cannot fall back on those streams, and again there would be an issue with using these ditches and ponds on Chol HaMoed. Rav Ashi Omar, Ravashi argues with Rav Papa and says that even if the streams could not water most of the field, since these streams are constantly flowing, then Meimar Omer will say to himself, if the field will not become irrigated in one day from this stream because there's not enough water going through the stream, so in tomorrow, a day later, 2-3 days, the stream will give enough water to this field, and a person will rely on the stream and will not go into any extra effort to bring water to water the field. And therefore, says Ravashi, you can use, providing you've got a stream going through the field, you can use those reservoirs of rainwater to water your fields. Continues the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon, Breicha shenoitefes mayim misode beis hashlochin zu, if you have two fields that are both irrigated fields, they're both dependent on added water, rainwater in and of its own is not enough for them, then if there's a breicha, which is a pool, which is dripping water from one beis hashalachin, you're allowed to take the water that's dripping from that beis hashalachin and use it to water a different beis hashalachin. Asks the Gemara of Havida de Pascha, are you not concerned that this pool with excess water from the Beis HaShalachin collected in it is going to get finished, and then once a person relies on that water on Chol HaMoed, he may then come to do extra effort in order to bring the rest of the water he needs for the field, and that would be also on Chol HaMoed. He's only allowed to use the water in this pool, in this brecha, which is being fed by the access water of the Beis HaShalochin, only all the while that it's still trickling from the Beis HaShalochin into this pool. All the while it's still trickling, we don't need to assume that the water is going to become used up, and there's no concern. Omar Rabbi, v'hu sheloi posak mayon rishon. And this is all, says Abaya, on condition that the original spring, which is watering, which is giving water to that original Beis HaShalochin, that original irrigated field, it's only if the original spring is still flowing and giving out water, then the water is going to be watering the Beis HaShalochin, and from the Beis HaShalochin it's going to be trickling into this pool. Then you're allowed to use the water in this pool to water a different Beis HaShalochin. We're not concerned the water is going to finish. But once the original Mayon, the original spring, stops pouring forth, one is no longer allowed to use those pools to water such a field. Says the Gemara, Tanya Reb Shimon ben Menasya Omer, Shtei arugos zu l'mayla mizu. If you have two rows of bushes, of plants, of trees, of crops that are one above the other, lo yidle min ha'tachtoino v'yashke es ha'elyono. Then if you have a pool of the excess rainwater in the lower one, you're not allowed to draw water from that lower pool and take the water to the upper row. Yeser al Kain Omar, Rabbi ben Shimon said even more than that. Afilu arugo achas, even if you have a single row, chetzio nomuch, half of which is lower down, v'chetzio gavoya, and half of which is higher up, you're not allowed to draw water from a low down place and water a higher up place. That's more effort than the Chachomim allowed on Chol HaMoed. Continues the Gemara, Tonu Rabbanon, Madlin, one is allowed to be Madlin, one's allowed to draw water and pour the water leyirokis for vegetables, kedei la'oichlon, provided that you're doing that, it's talking about Chol HaMoed, provided you're doing that in order that the fruits should then be optimally tasty and ready to be eaten. However, in bishvil leyapoison, if you're just doing it in order to improve those vegetables, then and you don't actually need them to eat them on Chol HaMoed, and you're just doing it in order that they should grow bigger and have more profit and benefit from them, also you're not allowed to do that on Chol HaMoed. You're only allowed to do it if it's going to serve you to be able to eat these vegetables on Chol HaMoed. Ravina, V'rava toisfa, have a kozli b'urcha. These two chachomim were traveling along the way. Chazu lahu gavra to have a doli davlo. He saw this person that was drawing water with a bucket, and it was obviously in a field which is called a stei bal, which is a field that doesn't need to be watered on Chol HaMoed. Omer li Rava toisfa l'Ravina. So Rabbi Toisfa said to Ravina, Leisemar l'shamte, let's come and excommunicate him. He's working on Chol HaMoed in a way that he's not allowed to. Omarle. So Ravina said to Rabbi Toisfa, Vatanya, did we not learn in a brayso a couple of lines ago, Madlin liyirokis kudei la'oichlon, that you're allowed to pour water and you're allowed to draw water and pour them onto vegetables if you want to eat them on Chol HaMoed? Omarle. So he said to him, Rabbi Toisfa said to Ravina, Misavras mar madlin maya. It's true that it said in the brayso madlin, and I translated the brayso as being drawing water. But now he's saying, Rabbi Toisfa is saying to Ravina, who said that that's what the word madlin actually means? Maybe you're never allowed to be madlin maya. You're never allowed to draw water with a bucket and pour it onto the yerokos, onto the vegetables. And when the brayso says madlin, you know what it means? It means something else. My madlin means shlufi. It means to pull out every other vegetable. You want to pull out certain vegetables if the vegetables are too tight and they're growing too tight near each other, and that is preventing them from growing optimally. You're allowed to pull out every other vegetable in order to give more space. And that's what it says. If you're doing it in order to be able to eat the vegetables on Chol HaMoed, you can pull them out. But if you're doing them just to improve them, you're not allowed to. Keditnan, as we learned in a Mishnah in Masechet Moed Katan, ha-meidal begefanim, here we're using the words meidal, which is like madlin, and it actually means that you're pulling out the vines that are too close to each other. There's too many vines, vine trees, grapevines that are growing too close to each other. They're stopping each other from growing properly, so he's pulling every other one out. In the same way as he's allowed to separate and pull out and thin out his own grapevines, you can do the same if they belong to aniyim, to poor people, either those that have been designated for peah, which belongs to the aniyim, or if it's oililois, if it's those bunches of grapes that are not being formed properly and they belong to the aniyim, called oililois. Rabbi Yehuda, that was the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir Omer, b'shaloi roshoyi ve'eini roshoyi b'shal aniyim. Rabbi Meir says you're only allowed to do it in those vines that are yours, not the vines that belong to the poor people. But either way, what do we see in this Mishnah? That the word meidal means to pull out. So who told you? And this is what Rabbi Tosfos said to Ravina, this person is watering his vegetables, he's not allowed to water his vegetables. And you bring me a brayso that says madlin, you're allowed to be madlin. Madlin doesn't mean to water. Omar Leiser, Ravina answered back, V'otanya, but I've got an explicit brayso that the word madlin is also used to water. And not only that, it's used in this context. Madlin mayim liyarokis. You're allowed to be madlin, you're allowed to draw water and pour water. Mayim liyarokis, k'dei la'ichlon, if it's with the intentions of eating them on Chol HaMoed. Omar Leisi answered back, Tanya, okay, you found a brayso that one's allowed to do this, so there's no reason to excommunicate this person that was watering his vegetables. Continues the Gemara. Ve'ein oisin ugiyos legefanim, and this takes us back to the Mishnah on Daf Beis Amud Aleph. We saw in the fourth line in the Mishnah, Ve'ein oisin ugiyos legefanim, one's not allowed to dig ditches around a grapevine on Chol HaMoed. The ditches were there in order to collect the water to keep the vines irrigated. Says the Gemara, my ugiyos. What does the word ugiyos actually mean? Omer of Yehuda says it means banchi, it means ditches. You're not allowed to dig ditches around the grapevine. Tanya nami hochi, a brayso to that effect. Eiluhen ugiyos, what are ugiyos? Bedidin, they are ditches. Shebeikre zeisim, that are around the roots of the olive trees, shebeikre gefanim, and the roots of the grapevines. Asks the Gemara, Eini, are you allowed to really dig these ditches around these trees on Chol HaMoed? V'amar Rav Yehuda himself said, Rav Yehuda saying, can it be that you're not allowed to? The Mishnah says, Eino isin ugiyos legefanim. Can it be that the Mishnah says you're not allowed to make these ditches? Rav Yehuda shara levnei bar tzisoi. Rav Yehuda allowed the people of this place, bar tzisoi, lemevad banchi lekarmein, and he allowed them to make these ditches in their fields. Answers the Gemara Loi Kasha. It's not a question. Ha b'chadati, to create and to dig a new ditch, that's osa. Ha b'atiki, but if you had already a ditch and the ditch got a little bit blocked up and it wasn't functioning properly, you're allowed to clear away and just make that ditch into a better ditch. That's not so much effort, and you're allowed to do that on Chol HaMoed. Continues the Gemara. Rabbi Loza ben Azariah oimer ein oisin es ha'oma. We saw in the Mishnah that it says that Rabbi Loza ben Azariah said you're not allowed to dig out a stream b'tchila. The first time you're digging out a stream, you're not allowed to do that on Chol HaMoed or Shvius. The Chachamim argued and said oisin es ha'oma b'tchila b'shvius. You're allowed to make such a stream in Shemitah. And if you had a stream that got ruined and got damaged, you're allowed to fix it b'moed on Chol HaMoed. Says the Gemara, Bishlei Moed. I can understand why Rabbi Loza ben Azariah said that on Chol HaMoed ein oisin es ha'oma b'tchila b'moed. I can understand on Chol HaMoed you shouldn't dig such a stream mishum d'katorach, because it's extra effort. You're not allowed to exert oneself too much on Chol HaMoed. Elo shvius. My Tama, why? What would be the issue in Shemitah to dig out a stream? Answers the Gemara, Pligi bar Abzeira v'Rab Abba bar Mamel. There's two reasons. Machlekes chad omar mipnei shenira k'oideir. One opinion says because it looks, if you're digging out a stream, it looks like you're hoeing the field. The way what hoeing does is that one digs out little parts of the field in order to soften the land, in order to prepare it to be used, and you're not allowed to be oideir in Shemitah. And if you're digging out this stream, it looks like it's oideir. The other explanation was because when you take out the earth in order to make the stream, where are you putting the earth? On the banks of this, what's going to be the stream. And you're actually preparing the banks to be sown, to be planted in, because now you've got lots of soft and loose earth on the banks of what's going to be this new stream, and you're not allowed to prepare the earth to be planted during Shemitah. Asks the Gemara, might be now, in what case is there going to be a difference between whether the reason is because it looks like hoeing or because you're preparing the banks? If as you're digging out this stream, the water is just there coming from the spring, as you're digging, as you're making the cavity, as the ditch, the water is filling it up. So the opinion who says the reason you're not allowed to dig out such a stream is because you're preparing the banks for planting, that still applies. You're still piling up loose earth on the sides of this stream. But the opinion who says that the reason it was also is because it looks like you're hoeing a field, leka. No one's going to say that you're hoeing a field if water is pouring straight into this ditch. Now the Gemara says that it's a very nice difference, but we have an issue. Says, I don't understand that the very person who says that there's a concern that shanira ka'oider, which indeed will not apply if the water's flowing straight into it, why is he not concerned that it looks like you are preparing, or not only looks like, you're preparing the banks to be able to be planted in? In which case, even if the water is flowing straight into the stream, it should be also according to everybody. Elos, says the Gemara, you're right. Whenever there's an issue of machshir agape lizriya, it's going to be osir, even if it doesn't look like oider. Elo ikabenayu, the opposite case is going to be a difference. The koshokil minei, there's no water flowing through it, so it would seem that it looks like oider. And you're worried now about the machshir agape lizriya? No, I'll give you a case where there's no machshir agape lizriya. If you take the earth that you're digging out of where you want the stream to be and you throw it far away, you don't pile it up nicely on the banks of this stream, so it doesn't look like it's machshir agape lizriya. So the opinion who says that there's an issue of machshir agape lizriya, there's no issue. And we just said before, everybody agrees with that. The one opinion who says there's a concern of nira ka'oider will still apply. Leman da'omar mipnei shemachshir agape lizriya, leka, there's no concern. Leman da'omar mipnei shenira ka'oider, ika. Says the Gemara, now the same question as before. I don't understand. Anybody who says that there's a concern of machshir agape lizriya should also have a concern of nira ka'oider. So whenever there's going to be nira ka'oider, it should be an issue, irrespective of whether there's an issue of machshir agape lizriya. And if everybody holds also of nira ka'oider and also of machshir agape lizriya, then there's never going to be a difference, because everybody's always going to say that either is or isn't an issue. But there's not going to be a difference between the two opinions. So what was the machlokes? So now the Gemara is saying a few words, and it's very cryptic, and the Achronim here, there's a big discussion in the Achronim what this actually means. But what the Gemara is now answering is that the machlokes, when it says that there was a machlokes, why according to Rabbi ben Azariah is there no, is that you're not allowed to dig this ditch in Shvius and Shemitah? Is it because it's nira ka'oider? Is it because machshir agape lizriya? It's not like we said before that they're arguing what the reason is. No, they have a very, very specific argument, and that is what happens if you hoe a field, and when you're hoeing the field, which is really just knocking the field with a tool, with a hoe, and you're softening it, you're digging up a little bit of the earth. Now normally what hoeing does is you leave the earth exactly where it is. You don't take the earth away. So what the discussion here is, if you're actually removing this earth from this ditch, is it considered oider? Is it not considered oider? So the opinion who says mipnei shenira ka'oider says it's still considered hoeing, even though you're removing the earth from the ditch. And according to the opinion who says machshir agape lizriya, he holds that there's no issue of oider. Oider only ever applies when you leave it. So when it comes to digging a ditch, it will never ever look like oider, because by default you're removing the earth, you're not leaving the softened earth in its place. In which case, in a case where you're throwing the earth far away from the banks, so everybody agrees there's no issue of machshir agape lizriya. Now you're going to have a discussion, is it nira ka'oider? So before we said as long as there's no water flowing straight into it, it's nira ka'oider. Now we're saying no. There was a machlekas, is it called nira ka'oider even though you're not keeping the earth in its place? So that's going to be the difference here. In this type of softening of the land, which is in the context of digging this ditch, then one opinion is going to say it is nira ka'oder, even though you're removing the earth, and the other opinion says that not. And that's how the Chaznish explains this Gemara. So let's see these words inside. Oider nami kika shokil beduchte monachle. The opinion who says that there's no oider, he holds, and it's only he who holds, that oider is only when you replace the earth exactly where it was. When you remove the earth away, as in the context of digging a ditch, that's not considered oider. And the other opinion says it is still considered oider, and therefore it looks like oider, and there will be an issue. Continues the Gemara. Ameimer masnila. Ameimer actually learnt explicitly in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah it just said, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said you don't dig an omo, a stream. And we didn't know why. And we saw there was a machlekas of Zera and Rabbi Abba bar Mammel as to why. But Ameimer had actually a version of the Mishnah that explicitly said, Mipnei shenira ka'oder, because it looks like hoeing, and therefore it's osa. And that was the reason of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. V'kashya leid Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And Ameimer actually had a seeming contradiction in the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Yomar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, could it be that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah holds kol shenira ka'oder, anything that looks like hoeing, also you're not allowed to do? Or this is going to contradict a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Oise Odom es Zavlo. If somebody's got a pile of dung, he's allowed to make it into an oitzer, into a stockpile. He's allowed to pile it up in Shemitah. Reb Meir Oiser. Reb Meir says you're not allowed to. Ad sheyamik shloisha tfachim. Unless you dig 3 tfachim into the ground, and then it doesn't look like you're fertilizing the field, and it just looks like you're making into storage, and then you're allowed to. Reb Meir says if you want, you can raise it 3 tvachim off the ground. If he's just got a little bit of this dung, and you're allowed to just leave it there, and moisif olav v'hoilech, and constantly add more dung onto the pile, it doesn't look like you're fertilizing the land. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah oiser. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says no. The only way that you're allowed to stock and pile up this dung is ache yamik shloisha. It's only if you dig down 3 tvachim into the ground, or shloisha, or if you raise it 3 tvachim, or if you put it onto some rock. Otherwise, it's going to look like you're fertilizing the land in Shemitah, and you're not allowed to do that. But either way, we see here that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says you're allowed to be yamik in Shemitah. You're allowed to dig a hole and in order 3 tvachim down, in order to put the dung. If you dig a hole, why have you not got an issue of nira ka'oder? So Reb Zera of Reb Abba bar Mammel, there's 2 answers to this. Chad Omar, one explained Kegoin Shehemik. It's talking about that he already had this ditch, this hole in the ground of 3 tvachim down from before Shemitah. If you had such a hole before Shemitah, you can fill it up with dung. It doesn't look like you are fertilizing the land. But if you haven't got such a hole before Shemitah, you're not allowed to dig it on Shemitah because it's nira ka'oder. The other one explained zibloi mechiach, the very fact that you're filling it up with dung is proving that you're not trying to be oider, you're not trying to hoe the field, you're just trying to put the dung in it, and therefore it doesn't look like you're hoeing the land, and therefore you're allowed to do this in Shemitah. Continues the Gemara, Masaknin is hamukul keles b'moed. If you had a stream, an omo, or an amo, which is going through the field, you're allowed to fix it on Chol HaMoed. Asks the Gemara, "My mukul keles, what does it mean they got ruined?" Omer of Abba, Rabbi Abba explained, "She'em hoiso amuka tefach, mamido al shisha tvachim." A regular stream is 6 tvachim deep. That's why it's called an amma, because an amma has, or some types of ammas have 6 tvachim in them. So it says, what happens if you had a stream of 6 tvachim, and then it got filled up with earth or whatever it was, and now there's only a tefach Are you allowed to dig down and clear out what's filled up this stream in order that it should now be from a tefach deep to 6 tefachim deep? That's what Rabbi says. Shem hoisa amuka tefach ma'amida al 6 tefachim. Says the Gemara. Pshita chetzi tefach al 3 tefachim. If you had a stream that was only 3 tefachim deep, and now it's got filled up to a half a tefach, even though the ratio of half a tefach to 3 tefachim is the same as a 1 tefach to 6 tefachim, kiven de le'ovar maya, but since water cannot flow easily through a stream which is just 3 tefachim high, lo yiklumhu, it's a useless stream, and you're certainly not allowed to do that on Chol HaMoed. Tfachim, however, if you want to now dig out from the depth of 2 tfachim al shneim osor, because you had a stream that was 12 tfachim deep, and again the ratio of 2 tfachim to 12 tfachim is the same ratio of 1 tefach to 6 tfachim, but the katorach tirchi yisera. But everybody will understand that since you're digging down to the depth of 12 tfachim, that would clearly be access of effort, and loy, it's also to do it on Chol HaMoed. The question is, Tfachayim al Shiva Mau, if you had a stream of 7 tfachim high, and now it's only 2 tfachim, are you allowed to make it from 2 tfachim to 7 tfachim, where you're only adding an extra 5 tfachim? It's the same 5 tfachim as between 1 and 6. Do we say, Hacha Chamisha Komamik? Do we say in the same way as between 1 and 6, it's only 5 tfachim that you're digging out? V'hacha here between 2 tfachim and 7 tfachim, also Chamisha Komamik, you're only taking out 5 tfachim of land and it will be mutter. Or Dilmo maybe no. Given the Ika Tefach Yisera, since you've got that 1 tefach which is lower down, then Ika Tircha Tfei, it's harder. The lower down is, the more you have to bend down, the harder it is to reach. And therefore the extra tefach between 6 tfachim and 7 tfachim, you wouldn't be allowed to dig out on Chol HaMoed. Says the Gemara, Teiku, we have no way of resolving that. We have to let that stand for now. Continues the Gemara, Abaya Shara lebnei Bar Hamdoch. Abaya allowed the people of Bar Hamdoch l'shchufei nara to clear out the river that they needed to drink from on Chol HaMoed. Rabbi Yirmiyah Shara lehu bnei Sakoisa. Rabbi Yirmiyah allowed these people of bnei Sakoisa lemichra to dig away nara tamima, a river that had got contaminated or it's got clogged up. That's a lashon of timtum, that he allowed them to do that. Rav Ashi Sharlu Lubnei Mosa Mechasya. Rav Ashi allowed the people of Mosa Mechasya Lakduche Nor Burvitz to clear away, to dig away at the river Burnitz that had got clogged up. Omar, he said, Kivan the Shosu Minei Rabim, since the public are drinking from this river, Karabim Domri, it's the needs of the public. Utnan, and we learned in our Mishnah in Daf Beis Amud Aleph that Oisin Kol Tzorki Rabim, any needs of the public are allowed to be taken care of on Chol HaMoed, and therefore he let them clear out this river. And in Mirz Hashem in the next shiur we're going to continue from here.